Essentially, what I support, and I think many members of my caucus support, is this targeted tax relief, broad-based on the income tax for our lower income payers. When we put the caps in place in 2017, it wasn't just about balancing our budget and paying down our unfunded liabilities. I think we recognize that Connecticut has the dubious distinction of being one of the highest tax burden states in the country, and this is a way long-term to try to change that. And as we're seeing the money is continuing to be put into our pensions, I don't think we know yet actuarially how much we've benefited from that. The one thing I could say is we've yet to sort of pass that structural change down to our residents, and I think this is an opportunity to do it. And so by lowering the income tax, it's a way to sort of almost reverse progressive tax, rather than raising it on the higher end, which isn't needed in a year of a surplus. Lowering it on the lower end, I think, has that same effect. The other piece I think that's very important to look at is the pass-through tax. We heard today this discussion of when it was put in place, and all of us can't forget it was put in place when the SALT caps were put in place by the federal government. What this pass-through entity tax is doing is it's not providing a tax benefit for businesses in Connecticut per se, but it's preventing them from having to pay more federal tax revenue for the government. So federal government. So every time we reduce this cap, a large portion, the big beneficiary of that is the federal government. It's not the state of Connecticut. I think we should be returning it to 93%. Not just because of the double taxation, but structurally, C corporations aren't subject to the SALT cap, so they get to deduct all their taxes. LLCs are subject to it, so your tax expenditures are capped at $10,000. Connecticut was the first in the country to pass this pass-through entity tax. There are 30 other states now that I think have adopted it, and so it puts us in the position of not penalizing businesses because of the federal tax code. And I think it gives Connecticut a competitive advantage for LLCs because they will come here and not look to other states that have a more beneficial tax structure. So it really isn't about benefiting businesses for our tax code. I think it's protecting our businesses from the impact of the federal caps that were put in place. So I really encourage everybody to wrap your head around it, try to understand it, and restore that cap. I've heard from many businesses. I think when this bill was put in by our caucus 2 years ago, the only people we heard from was the CPA, the head of the CPA Association. And this really germinated from them because they file all the taxes for individuals and businesses in Connecticut, and they were really hearing about the impact of this tax. It's not good for economic growth in Connecticut, and it's unfairly hurting our residents because of what the federal government did.
I know we have lots of discussions about keeping Connecticut competitive and comparing us to our neighboring states in terms of tax policy. And I know you and I have had a lot of discussions about Connecticut and our neighboring state, Massachusetts, and some of the things Massachusetts does. Are there any particular examples of things Massachusetts does in their tax code? Because certainly they have seemed to have created quite a robust business climate that you think we should emulate here.
Well, I think as you and I have discussed in the past, I think one of the things that Massachusetts does with the caps that they have in place is they require a dedicated portion of their surplus to go toward tax relief. And I think it's something that we need to keep an eye on to keep a balance. When you think about, we are in the last 5 years putting over $8 billion into our pension fund, which is a laudable goal given where it is structurally. We also, the Appropriations Committee last week just approved additional hero pay of about $50 million because the arbitrator found that we have an ability to pay. And so we are seeing a little bit more of robust benefits for our state workers. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, we can't forget about the taxpayers in Connecticut. They've only been impacted by inflation over the last 2 years. I think that we should be making sure that we proportionately devote some of our surplus to them. And in the past, it was done 2 years ago, but I think we have an opportunity for structural change. I think tax credits are temporary, something that will make a structural difference for people. They could plan in their lives. Maybe they'll buy that home, because the mortgage numbers will work for them if we're freeing up $600 a year in taxes. And so that Massachusetts has built that discipline in place. We might want to take a look at that same type of discipline.
And thank you. I would welcome further discussions on that. I would love to see something statutorily that says, in the same way that we've dedicated the volatility cap money to paying down pension debt, to savings that we make on those reduced pension payments have to be dedicated to either income tax relief or sending back to municipalities so they can lower their property taxes. As you say, I am constantly approached by constituents who talk about our record surpluses, but how are they benefiting? So I think these tax cuts are a good first step. But like you, I'd love to see in statute a requirement that as we have surpluses in future, some of that does go to providing tax relief to our residents. So thank you very much.